Welcome back. Again, we'd like to thank all of our valued sponsors of the NextGen Supply Chain Conference, our Diamond Level sponsor, Honeywell Intelligrated, our Platinum sponsor, the Association for Supply Chain Management, and our Gold sponsor, Alemica. Bob?
Thank you, Brian. As someone who writes a lot about automation, I'm excited to introduce this next block. There have certainly been new automated technologies introduced in warehouses and distribution centers in recent years, like shuttle systems and automated trailer loading and unloading. But I don't think anything has gotten as much attention lately as robotics. While many will tell you that robots are coming to this space, if you've watched it the last few years, I think you have to agree that the robots are here. Without question, autonomous mobile robots have found a home in fulfillment systems. You might even say that they're a mature technology now. And as we learned from MSC Industrial the other day, piece-picking robots are gaining in implementations. We're going to kick this block off with a panel discussion moderated by Matt Wicks, the Chief Robotics Solution Architect for Honeywell Intelligrated, and featuring 5 leading players in the robotics space. We'll have Fergal Glenn, the Vice President of Marketing for 6 River Systems, Lior Elazari, he co-founded and is the CEO of Invia Robotics, Terry O'Hanlon, Chief Marketing Officer for Gray Orange, Pete Blair, Vice President of Marketing for Berkshire Gray, and Wes Reed, the Senior Vice President of Product Management and Operations for IM Robotics. Together, they represent the breadth of solutions out there today. We're going to end the block with a presentation by Adrian Kumar, the Global Head of Operations, Science, and Analytics at DHL. Adrian's going to talk about DHL's robotics journey from a focus on hardware to a focus on software. Now, real quick before I turn it over to Matt, this is a moderated panel. Matt's going to have a lot of questions, but at some point or there, he's going to throw it out to the audience. So if you're an attendee, feel free to submit a question. We may not get to all of them, but we'll try to get to some. So Matt, without further ado, the microphone is yours. Take it away.
All right, thanks, Bob. I really appreciate it, and also thanks to the entire panel here. It's I appreciate you all joining. It's I'm humbled by some of the the attendees here. It's like some awesome organizations, and really looking forward to the conversations today. So thank you very much for joining us. So let's get things kicked off. So Terry, let's start out with you. We'll talk a little bit about 2020. It's been quite a year so far, as we were talking right before the panel started here. So how are your customers, or how are customers thinking differently about the way the capital projects are done in terms of robotics and automation, given this environment? Has it increased? Has it decreased this year? And then, like, how do you see that moving forward in the future, in their planning?
So great question. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that we've seen an explosion of conversations in this market. I think 2020 was a real wake-up call, especially for people who could not, companies who could not, whose operations weren't that resilient. And, when all inventory needs to switch to e-commerce because stores are shut down and your operations can't accommodate that kind of change, there's a lot of pain going on. And what we're hearing from our customers and also from the prospects that we're talking to is people saying, I don't want to go through that again. And I want to have an answer for my board of directors when they ask me, what am I doing to be prepared for COVID-20 or whatever gets thrown at us moving forward. And obviously, when something this cataclysmic happens, everyone realizes the need for change. So I do think it's been an accelerator in people who have been kind of on the sidelines thinking about modernizing their fulfillment centers. They now know the time to move forward is now. What we haven't seen, unfortunately, from our perspective, is a commensurate change in the decision-making cycle. It seems that everyone realizes I need to change, but I want to hold on to the same ways that I've always evaluated this technology. I want to take months to talk to everybody. I want to take months to issue an RFP. I want to take months to get those responses back. And then I'm okay with my solution taking months to deploy. And obviously, if there's one thing that we all realize now, it's those old models no longer work. And the nice thing about robotics, everybody here on the panel, is that you don't necessarily need to use your crystal ball and figure out 8 years from now, what am I going to need? Robotics and the software that is accompanies it gives you that flexibility to act now and change and revise and move forward. So that's part of our mission now, is to get people to understand that buying these solutions isn't the same as buying things that are locked down and immovable. You know, in fact, robotics are not only scalable, but portable. You know, we see people looking at micro fulfillment centers and doing hyper local fulfillment models. And, you know, you can act, and if it's wrong, move it to another spot. So it's an exciting time in terms of, you know, real estate space and how you think about placing your fulfillment closer to the customer and all of that. And it, you know, hopefully everything, the model will evolve, as well as the technology, which has been around for a good while, as Bob mentioned at the beginning of the panel.
Yeah, I mean, there's a ton of stuff that has changed, and, you know, being in our organization, all of our organizations are part of in logistics, and just the shift in you know, e-commerce and fulfillment has just been, it's been crazy. And, you know, I mean, from my personal experience, it's been just this massive onslaught of, like, I buy everything online now. It's like, I'm sure I'm not the only one that's doing that, and that really does impact our businesses. And I think our customers are really seeing how their systems or their solutions really, they need automation to survive. And that's it's crystallized with this in this moment in time. So great feedback. So Lior, so let's talk about, like, applications. So like, what are those applications that are like critical in this time? In, like, how is our, you know, pitch changing in terms of the environment, and what kind of solutions are we seeing kinds of spikes in?
So I think, actually, to sort of iterate Cherry's point, the reason we're implementing robotics is their ability to accept change, to adapt to changes very quickly, right? Very rapidly, sort of like a human, right? We put them in different conditions, they're able to adapt. Where in the old days, the fixed automation, I mean, you know, when you put a conveyor belt, that's it. It's going to move, you know, an item from point A to point B. We really don't want to change that. So what we've seen now, actually, as part of an uptick through, you know, due to the COVID, what's been happening there, is two things. One is, you know, warehouses are under extreme pressure. I mean, we have a customer that actually saw greater volumes in the last few months that they've seen over the peak of last year. And it's really just because, you know, retail stores are closing, everybody is closing, and all that you know, that need is going somewhere. It's not that it's disappeared. It's not that people are not buying stuff. It's that they're changing in the way they're buying stuff. Instead of them going to the stores, you know, they're ordering online. So with our robotic systems, and actually I know some of the other robotic systems as well here, right? The goal is to change it, to adapt, and we've been able to adapt to various conditions. So, for example, you know, we do a lot more replenishment now. We also have a new way of operating the robots in a picker wall type of application, where we operating the robots overnight, preparing, sort of defragging the warehouse for, you know, the jobs that have to be, you know, for the next day, and then pickers can come in. And that actually proved to be very important. A couple of our customers, where they had a COVID situation. They had a few people who got tested for COVID. They actually had to shut down the whole warehouse. They had to bring everybody out, go test, you know, and see who's negative and be able to bring it back. But now the warehouse is basically dead, right, for a whole day. So we were able to still do work, to still have the robots go there and, you know, like I said, defrag and get all the orders that they're about to, you know, supply. and that basically, we did that sort of, not overnight, but over the last, few months, developing that software, developing those applications, and pushing them onto the robots. So again, I think that the theme of the game here, right, is change, adaptability. When you're evaluating a robot, whether it's good or bad, I think it's really about the change, and again, it's the difficulty of predicting, right, what's going to happen in, with whole this COVID situation, it's very difficult to predict till next month, right? Let alone, 3 or 4 years from now, or even 10 years from now. And we get swings, right, where the whole country, we're going to shut down. Oh no, we're going to start back up. Oh, we got to isolate. We got to redo this stuff. We had to redo some of our software actually to keep people away from each other 6 feet. So, because our software guides the people too, and basically keep them away. And if they're getting close to each other, send an alert to somebody, and then, try to do contact tracing and really help them with the situation. And again, and that's really the goal, right? So the goal of the robots is to be able to adapt to the changes that we're seeing today. And I think, this is exactly the right approach. I mean, we have several customers who've, signed up with us just because of that. So like to Terry's point, they did not want this to happen to them ever again. They don't want to be left where they have very little resources. In fact, one of them told us that their staffing agency, the temp staffing agency, called them and said, we cannot supply you anybody this year, period. They've been using them for years. They said, we cannot supply you anybody. And this puts a lot of pressure on them. And they're like, look, we got to change. We got to do it, in a different way. And I think one of the things too that I want to iterate, right, that the goal of robotics is not just the change, it's also the ability to deploy, to introduce the robots in a very quick fashion, as opposed to the old days where we had to plan for 5 years in advance and do that. In fact, we've done a deployment in Japan. And one of the problems we had was that Japan closed all of our access. Nobody could go there. And we basically did the deployment all remotely. We're able to ship them the robots. They did a little bit of the work, and we were able to do everything remotely. And I think that's what we're seeing, right? We're seeing this as an ability not just to change, also to adapt and to introduce the robotic systems in a very, clean and basically efficient fashion.
Yeah, so some of the things I was thinking about while you were talking about is how AMRs really are a very flexible piece of automation that, like remote deployment is a great example of that. It's like we can send these bots out and they can go make, we can deploy them remotely and really start to add value to the end customers. So with that said, Pete, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about okay, we've got AMRs, but we also have traditional automation. And so how do we see this confluence of both the traditional automation solutions, conveyance and sortation and those kinds of things, with some of these brand new processes that we're seeing with robotics?
Yeah, so I think pretty much like any new technology, you're seeing an evolution, right? Most of the customers that we deal with have made major investments in traditional automation infrastructure. They're not going to just throw that away. Some are going through, upgrade plans, but they're not going to just throw away everything they have. So there's actually a really good opportunity to augment those systems with new types of robotic technologies that integrate. So, we see real big interest in things like robotic induct stations, right? So to work with traditional unit sorters, to use robots and some scanning technology to feed those unit sorters. So you can actually drive more capacity, more utilization. You can socially distance the people who used to be all stacked together in those, in those induct cells. So that's one example. You see people who've invested in all types of ASRS systems, from sort of the older generation ones to the newer generation ones. And so there's this whole movement around, can you convert an ASRS goods to person station into a goods to robot station? And that's a very valuable or perfectly capable use case for it. But we're actually seeing a move towards thinking a little bit broader than that, right? So one of the things that there are constraints when you try to convert something that just was built for a person into something that's built for a robot, and there's trade-offs or constraints that you deal with. So we see some customers thinking a little bit broader, and they're saying, well, what if we look at the process on either sides of that, right? Can we do some things? So for instance, we have customers who are picking store replenishment orders, break pack items. They're actually picking hundreds of orders at a time served from a single ASRS. And so they did that by separating out the robotic system from being tightly married to the ASRS, stepping it back so you can orchestrate totes in and totes out, and really sort of rethink the process a little bit. We've also got some customers who are taking the e-commerce thing and say, look, I have a pick cell, and let's put a robot in to do the pick cell. And we talked to them and said, well, what do you do with that, right? Well, we pick the orders and then we ship them off to a pack station. So, well, why don't we think a little bit about the process? Why not pick and pack directly into the shipping container? We can do that with a robot today. You probably couldn't do that a couple of years ago through careful handling and other things that exist. So there's new opportunities to start thinking larger. And I think when you take the next step, I think in mobile, and there's others who are on this panel who are very into the mobile, you're going to start to see mobile move from something that's sort of a constrained type of application to something, and again, this is probably more greenfield, obviously, than brownfield, rethinking of how you can do things with swarms of robots, right? Terry's company does this, others do it, we do it. Start thinking about mobile robots orchestrated as a team, as a unit, to do something bigger, do something broader than just move things around. There's value in moving things around, obviously, but if you look at things like we have a customer who wants to do sort and sequence in order to move cases and orders and other things in the distribution center such that they load the trucks for store aisle friendly put away, right? And with mobile, you can get this sort of ultimate, infinite's not the right word, but you know where I'm going, right? In terms of sorting and sequencing of all those moves. So there's an evolution. There's value in augmenting traditional automation with systems today, but you're also seeing people think broader. And I think over the next 12 to 18 months, you're going to see even more of those sort of larger scale systems, both that augment traditional as well as supplant some of that traditional automation.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating to think about how these things that we have wanted to do for many years in logistics. You can tell by the gray in my beard that I've seen a few things, and we've always wanted to do certain things. And what's really cool that we're starting to see with the robotic technology and mobile technology is the ability for us to do those kinds of things. So Fergal, let's talk about that a little bit. So it's like, so why we mentioned a couple of advantages behind AMRs, but why AMRs? What are those things that they really why are those things? What are those inroads that we're making here, and how are customers benefiting from that?
Thanks, Matt. Good question, and thanks for the opportunity to be here today. So I'm going to start with kind of like, why are we seeing the inroads right now? And like, one thing is, all you have to do is just look outside and look at the way the world is today. I think we've all accepted that like Main Street, as we knew it in late 2019, like it's never going to come back to the way it was, no matter what happens with a vaccine, no matter what happens in the future. Like we talked before, we went live about how our own buying habits have changed. Like outside my house here in Arlington, Massachusetts, we have packages being dropped off 2-3 times a day. No matter what happens going into 21, 22, 23, like I think that's going to continue. So there's just going to be, we're seeing more and more eaches need to be moved out of, be it a fulfillment center or a micro fulfillment center or a warehouse. And it's not just eaches coming to people's homes, but it's also eaches for when the stores are back open. It's eaches that are now replenishing smaller and smaller footprint stores. We're seeing with our customer base on the 3PL side, on the e-com side, on the industrial side, that there's certain supply chain leaders out there now who have realized that fulfillment can now be a strategic differentiator for my business. And so they're starting to make those investments. They're starting to purchase the solutions that all of us on this panel are offering. So that's kind of, the why. And then like on the benefits, like there's so many, at its simplest, you can think about benefits are, well, we're helping to make the job easier for your associate in the warehouse. If you're an operator, we're helping open up the pool of available labor to you. So we're giving you the ability to hire somebody who you may not have thought about hiring in the past. For the operator, we're all helping you to get more through your building with the same or even less people in the building. We're also like for people doing those tasks in the warehouse, be it a pick or a push, every single one of us is helping to make those tasks faster. So like at a high level, like, yes, there's benefits around like reducing the walking, making the job easier for your employees, speeding up the task. Then there's also kind of, you go a small layer deeper, kind of the conversations that we're all starting to have now as well around kind of health and safety considerations. Lior mentioned how with collaborative robots, because they know where each other are, like you're able to keep your people separated. And over the last few months, we've had multiple customers come and purchase purely for that reason. They've made purchases because we want to make sure that when people come into my building, that we're keeping them as safe as possible. And so they're using robotics to keep people separated. And they're also, you know, using zoning mechanisms with those robotics as well to keep people within their own zones. The last thing I'll add as well, and what we see a lot about in terms of the benefits are, you know, when we used to go into the retail store, there was that bespoke or there was some customizations that we could get. One of the benefits you get from a robotic system, because it's so flexible, is now within that fulfillment center, if you want to add in value-added services, like that's something that's very possible where, for example, like we've got an entertainment company who's a customer, an associate will go pick an item in one part of the building. Once picked, that item is then brought over to the area in the building to a different associate who's doing the value-added services. That person does their work there with the item, with the product. Then once they're done, that's all put back into a container and sent back to the pack-out area. And so this type of flexibility is allowing the customers who are buying our solutions to, like, yes, you can have a use case that you're solving day one, and then once you get this technology into the building, because it's so flexible, it can adapt or you can evolve it to meet new business use cases that maybe you never even imagined when you brought it in day one.
Yeah, I totally agree with what you're saying there, Virgil. I mean, there's the opportunities to apply AMR technology and to solve some of these problems that, you know, like the case that you just used there with regards to, you know, value-added services. It is cost prohibitive to run a stick of conveyor or a whole, you know, mile worth of conveyor over to the value-added services area where, you know, you can put in a bot and say, you know, map the area and off you go, and very quickly add some value to the end customers. So Wes, so your organization just recently released a new AMR, and again, so obviously your organization sees some benefit or some value in, you know, this alternate approach to AMR technology. So, but as these solutions become more sophisticated in all of these different use cases and all this flexibility, you know, it was really easy when a conveyor was you know, when you got a conveyor, you know how fast a conveyor runs and you move it from point A to point B, and, you know, you don't have to prove to anybody that it really works. And, but there may be a barrier with regards to AMRs here. So what do you see? Do you see other barriers in terms of the adoption of AMRs, and how are you overcoming these types of challenges?
Yeah, it's yeah. So thank you again for the opportunity, and yeah, you've just seen where we've also introduced an AMR. I mean, you know, definitely went into what I call the deep end of the pool early on, and we are that technology is even, I think there's even a greater barrier to understanding something like that because it's further out than the typical AMR adoption curve. So because I mean, the way I look at it, AMRs today are moving much more into the mainstream within warehousing and e-commerce, and they're more easily understood, which is a good opportunity, and that also speaks to one of the barriers of adoption. You know, I mean, I think back to even when not that many years ago, think about the fact that Wi-Fi on your laptop was a pretty amazing thing, right? And you know, you travel someplace and you're like, okay, and you know, it took you 15 minutes, or maybe it's just me, but it took me 15 minutes to figure out how to make my Wi-Fi connection work. And now it's completely understood. Nobody even pays any attention to it anymore, and you just accept it as the norm. And so I think the same thing is happening with robotic technology. I mean, LiDAR was a fascinating thing 20 years ago. Now it's becoming much more mainstream. And so, I mean, we make efforts, education efforts, to kind of educate people and push that along. But frankly, some of that I think just comes with you know, the general acceptance and continuing evolution of people's comfort with technology. I think that's part of it. More specifically, though, you know, and Fergal talked about safety. Everybody's talking about safety. And I think there's a general concern about that as well. People really, they see all of us show videos of our robots not running into people or not running into infrastructure. But until you're face-to-face with a robot and it doesn't run into you specifically, I think there is still some general mistrust and some concern about that. So, you know, I mean, the way we address that is like a lot of the folks here, we're very heavily invested and involved in RIA 15.08. And we actually partner with a independent third-party safety consultant that we has done a full certification on our product family. We demonstrate that to people as well. So again, it's continuing that education piece. And then lastly, I think everybody here would agree, there's that age-old, I'm afraid that this robot is going to take my job. And I mean, I think all of us probably on this panel and the audience as well would probably agree that fear is a little overblown. I mean, there have been so many different technology steps forward in society that really haven't had the catastrophic impact that everybody thought they did. But one thing we've started to do is, when we're talking about our products, we also talk to people about potential new job opportunities around those products, right? And just like factory workers, I mean, a factory worker 50 years ago, that skill set is not sufficient for a factory worker today. So we definitely talk about that. We also talk about the potential opportunity for people to improve their skill set in support of robots. That's one thing. And then secondarily, today with the huge growth in online ordering that every single person here has talked about so far, is frankly, you know, there are not enough people to fulfill the upside in orders that everybody's seeing right now. And I would say that a company would probably put in as many robots as they could and not affect their hiring at all in the near to midterm. And then long term, again, you will have to see how things go. Fergal, I believe, is correct. Nobody's ever going back to running around in their car all weekend long to shop. You know, nobody wants to do that anymore. So I think overall, those are the three primary barriers to adoption that we deal with. And that's, I mean, those are kind of the ways that we try to go after them and educate people and alleviate their concerns.
Some awesome points there, Wes. It's you know, the organizations that I've been engaged with have really seen automation and robotics specifically as a way to not is enabled to enable more jobs, be able to enable applications to where we can put the workforce into applications where actually there's more value added time for those individuals, not necessarily a workforce replacement, but an additive to it, because they see the criticality of automation being able to sustain their organizations. It's a very critical piece. So excellent point. So So we talked a lot about robots. So let's talk a little bit about the software. So Terry, I did a little research before the panel, and there's some interesting things about your organization and software. So I'd love to talk to you about, like, why is software so critical? Why is it important here, and how does it like enable these robotic solutions?
It's interesting. We were just having a talk about this the other day. If you think about the supply chain more broadly than fulfillment, we've always used analytics, artificial intelligence, machine learning to optimize those global multivariate decisions. But for whatever reason in fulfillment, people have always tried to solve problems with people and process, and not necessarily advanced software. So one of the, I think, really amazing things about the founders of Gray Orange is they looked at this industry and saw a real opportunity for three technologies that are changing the nature of work, no matter what industry, machine learning, artificial intelligence, and robotics, to be applied to fulfillment to optimize it. And there's a couple of reasons for that. Number one, as has already been mentioned, there's not enough people. You can't just throw people at this. I think it's very interesting that the staffing agency is like, I'm sorry, we can't give you any more people for the rest of the year. And if you're a company who's typically, solve throughput problems or emergency orders, got to meet the window and all that by, hey, let's get, another crew in here. That's no longer an option. So, and in terms of, replacing people's jobs, if you think about it, the software and the robotics, and not just the robots, but really all of the equipment across the fulfillment center being orchestrated by software is something that it's not a job that's been done. Like if you think about batch processing or whatever that's coming from traditional WMS systems, that's not optimizing an order in every moment of the day. So Gray Matter, which is the fulfillment operating system that orchestrates all of our robots, no matter the form factor, has at its core something that's called a dynamic solver. So in every moment of it, of course, there's predictive and prescriptive logic about how to process orders to be fulfilled, but then real time happens and something shakes it up. And those real-time data streams are continuously informing Gray Matter. And Gray Matter is instructing not just our robots, but lifts that might go to multi-mezzanines and huge picking arms for moving pallets, et cetera. It's orchestrating all of it. And the people don't really know that a change has been made. They're accepting the work as it comes to them. But the software is deciding in every single moment, what's the next decision that's going to give me more payoffs in the decision than trade-offs if we can't get everything done? So it's super cool technology and logic applied to this industry. And I'll say one other thing about the software. We have a command. So when you use our systems, there's a command center that's now in the fulfillment center. And even though AI and machine learning are making these decisions, humans can override them. You can see, on 6 panels, what's going on. You have more insight than you've ever had into how the operation is going. And if you say, no, you know what, I disagree with this, I want to open up another pick pack station, a non-programmer can make that change and the system smoothly operates. So what we've seen in customers that have implemented is employee satisfaction scores actually go up. Like people feel like in answering questions such as, my company values me as an employee, my company invests in my future, those scores just by implementing a system like this go up because people see the value because they have insights they've never had before. So along with all the other things about not running up and down the aisles and being socially distanced and all of that, it's like there's more command and control, and you're equipping people to do their job as these intensities exacerbate, like more out the door, more e-commerce, more eaches that are more expensive to fulfill than certainly store replenishment. Just imagine being somebody who runs these centers today. It's a bigger task than it's ever been. So anyway, and so software that can take feeds from all the other existing software that's there and orchestrate it together. So we call that dynamic solving. And then we have an orchestrator and a bunch of applications. And our belief long-term is whatever that equipment is across the fulfillment center, no matter who made the robot, no matter who made the equipment, the software really is the core central piece to making the exact right decision in the exact right time every time. And that hasn't been applied to fulfillment to date.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, you're spot on here. It's like, the mechanics of the robots are an enabler, but it's really the software behind the scenes. It's the brains that make it all like come together and perform that work that we want to get accomplished. So, Pete, in terms of software, in terms of other really cool applications, each picking. So there's obviously a major software component to picking, but so what's the current state of the art of each picking solutions?
Yeah, so I'll absolutely jump on the software bandwagon when it comes to robotic each picking. That is the heart of what we do. All of our solutions revolve around picking, handling individual items. And really one of the things is interesting when you talk to casual people who look at robots, and everybody's seen the YouTube videos of the cars being manufactured. The sparks are flying and everything's moving crazy, and you're like, wow, that's awesome. But what people don't realize is that if you move that car that's in that video 6 inches to the left, there's no sparks because the robot just keeps doing what it was doing to no effect because it's doing a rote motion. When you start talking about using item level picking in a distribution center, it's not immediately apparent when you look at it, but it really is a very dynamic environment, right down to just inside of a tote. Think about even a person, right? If you reach into a box or reach into a grocery bag at home, right, and you pull something out, well, everything inside of there moves, right? When you pulled that one thing out, everything moved. So as people, we all look at, oh yeah, everything moved, that's no big deal, I just grab it. Well, a robot has to look in there and go, oh, that's completely different than it was 2 seconds ago, or half a second ago, or 100 milliseconds ago. So there's a whole challenge that really is all in the software side around being in real time, interpreting the computer vision, the sensing, and that's from visual sensing to scales to other types of sensors. That really there's a whole package, a whole battery of technologies that make real picking with robots work. And this is a level of intelligence, a level of sophistication much higher than traditional industrial robots. Now, the arm might be that same arm, that same robot that was, painting or welding in a car shop, but driving it and all the technologies around it to make it do its thing. So what we've seen, is a lot of pilots around each picking, and those tend to be, does it work? Like, does it work? Rather than, can I get ROI from it? And so, we always encourage the people we talk to, like, that's fine, we'll show you it working. Let's talk about how you get ROI. How do you roll this technology out? And so there are people using it. There are customers who have implemented. We have systems that run multiple shifts, 7 days a week, that are doing each picking. They're picking millions of items a month in a real production environment. But it is still an emerging space, right? There's a lot of people who originally said, oh, I'll just go to the robot manufacturer, give me an arm and we'll set it up somewhere and we'll make it do something. And those people were burned because they didn't have all that level of intelligence to do picking. And so I think it's really where we are is there are production systems, there are production each picking systems that provide value that are paying back today. They're not as many as there should be. And a lot of it is just because of where we are as an industry. And a lot of the pilots were around, did it work? Less about, does it work for me and my business? Does it give me an ROI? So we always, when we engage with customers, always talking about like, yep, picking's the heart of what we do, but let's make sure we're looking at what you're actually trying to accomplish, figure out the right way to do it. And then the core picking technology, which relies on all that sophistication of all that hardware, but a giant piece of software in there that you don't need to know about doing its job. So state of the market is, I think you're going to see a lot more picking over the next 12 to 18 months. You're going to start to see these projects emerge, but it does lag AMRs. It does lag some of the other spots. And part of that is that misconception of the level of technology sophistication required to make picking work versus just seeing a robot moving around. And so that's where we're at. But it's exploding. The interest level is tremendous.
Yeah, I always when we talk about each picking and item picking, you know, I always talk about we think like people, and you know, it is a really hard problem. And you know, the people, I think sometimes, you know, it's easy to overestimate, you know, the complexity in the picking operation. And there's been some tremendous strides in the past few years in the level of ability for robotic solutions to be able to deal with, you know, a wide variety of different types of products, mixes, shapes, sizes, weights, all of those different types of things. And not to rehash this software discussion, but that's exactly, you know, it's about that intelligence and that ability to, you know, figure that out. So Wes, so now we talked about each picking, but now we combine mobility on top of each picking. And so can you talk a little bit about the challenges associated with this, and how does that combination of taking mobility and each picking and combining these technologies really add value to the end customers?
Yeah, sure. Pete made a couple of really interesting observations that I resonate with so much. I mean, it is in my mind, I think in everybody's mind, it is, I would call it almost the equivalent of the last mile in you know, bringing network connectivity to your home. I mean, ultimately, being able to automate that labor that reaches into a shelf and picks that item off of the shelf is the problem we're talking about. And yeah, IAM has been working with on this a long time. The opportunity is absolutely enormous. Again, it is in my opinion, probably one of the last really under-tapped and underserved areas. And primarily that's because the adoption curve for it, if you go back to my early answer about people's just general slowness to adopt technology, it's taken longer. But it is, I would say it's growing very strongly for us and probably for the market as a whole in the mid term to the long term. In the immediate short term, we had like Pete indicated, we are going through a lot of pilots. We've got several production level deployments of our mobile picking solution. But to your question, combining the mobility piece with the picking is really where that challenge, I think, compounds by orders of magnitude. You know, if you think about traditionally, this is the way I describe it. We use a FANUC arm, and I went to the FANUC Integrators Conference last year, and the way I presented it there, they said if you think about it, most people use a FANUC arm, they mount it statically, and then it identifies fiducials on a work surface, and then it goes and it does its thing, right? Well, in a mobility world, you literally have to move, identify fiducials, align and register to those fiducials, and perform work. And you have to do that hundreds of times an hour in order to be able to really present a positive ROI in a warehousing and e-commerce space. So the level of software sophistication that is required there is just enormous. And again, and I think the average audience does not appreciate that. We all do, but that is absolutely one of the biggest challenges with the adoption overall. I mean, there have been a lot of picking solutions. There have been a lot of AMR-based solutions that really advertise themselves as picking robot, right? And I think they've done a really good job from a marketing perspective of presenting themselves as that. I mean, at the end of the day, that's true. That's really not a picking robot. It is a picking solution. But everybody recognizes that this is where the market has to go. So I guess to wrap my point up, probably stating some of the obvious, but the software, not only the autonomy software to move autonomously in a facility like an AMR does, but that ability, that perception ability to be able to identify an item and successfully pick it is just orders and orders of magnitude greater than what people realize. You know, I always talk in a very general manner when we talk to customers that, you know, we were all programmed to pick things up and place them when we were all using our Fisher Price, you know, round peg and a round hole toys when we were little kids, right? That's when we learned a lot of this stuff. But I mean, we're teaching a robot every single time how to pick something up, if it's standing up like this, laying down like that, and every one of those is a taught behavior, and the scale that goes into that is pretty mind-boggling.
Yeah, no doubt some of the challenges when, I mean, the picking problem is difficult. And then when you layer on top of that, the complexity of the mobility and perception, presents some pretty unique challenges for sure. You know, it all gets back to what is that value? How do you add value to the end customer? So when we talk about that, the commercial aspects of this, so there's a lot of different alternate financing models. So Lior, can you talk a little bit about like alternate models, RAS models, and how that fits in here, and what kind of benefits do we see in that type of alternate model?
Sure, that's actually a really good question. It really ties up a lot of the the points that the team has been making here. So RAS, or robotic as a service, is really a play on the software as a service, right? In the old days, I don't know if you remember, having to set up your own email server, and you have to have an IT person come in, and you have to maintain it, and you have to deal with it. Nowadays, you just go to Google; they do everything for you. Same thing with the CRM, right? Salesforce does all that software for you. What's happening with RAS, robotic as a service, we're doing the same thing with hardware. And really what it's doing is it's doing a couple of things. One, it's really making a partnership with our customer, right? Because if there, for example, we have a deployment of about 120 robots. If you own 120 robots, you're part of the robot business now. You got to have somebody who knows how to maintain them, how to optimize them, how to program them. And if you don't have that, the ownership is on you. If you don't get that productivity from the robots, you already paid for them. And when we've talked to a lot of the customers who have deployed the traditional systems that have cost, we've talked to one person, they spent $150 million on a system, and asked him, what's your ROI on it? He's like, don't ask me. And it was great. It was a really fun project, but it took us 5 years to complete. And we never actually got the productivity that we needed out of it. And they already spent that money. So instead, what's happening is it actually puts the ownership on us, on the robotics company, and where it should be, right? It makes our life a little bit more difficult because we got to make sure that the system is productive. But if not, we're actually in the right place, and we have the right team to understand what to do in order to make that, more productive. So for example, when we sell our systems, we don't sell the number of robots to our customers. We sell them the productivity of these robots. So we guarantee that the robots will do, so many units per hour, and that's the system that we sell to them. And if it doesn't do that, the ownership again comes back on us. And even tying it to sort of, the software aspect piece, we had to develop a lot of software that actually ended up, same thing, orchestrating a lot of parts in the warehouse because, we made, for example, the picking a lot faster, but now their sortation was slower. And the system will just sort of, hung up, and then the robot systems are just sitting there waiting, right? And because we're in charge of that productivity, that's on us. So we were able to go to the customer and said, okay, look, we need to speed up your sortation system or your pack-out system. And now our system sort of controls that orchestration. So to get that items to flow. And what we noticed is that in a lot of warehouses, almost 50% of the time is just idle time, times that haven't been orchestrated correctly, that, warehouse managers have a really difficult job of trying to figure out every single piece of the jobs that their people have to do. And you might, introduce one piece of technology, but if you don't fix everything end to end, that piece of technology is actually not going to do much for you. And it's really going to, bottleneck, and then you need to free up other stuff. So again, so tying it back to the RaaS model, in the RaaS model, we're the ownership of that, right? We have to make sure that those items are flowing because they're paying us on that flow and how much that flow is how much of a system they bought and how much flow it's going to produce for them. It also levies up a lot of their capital to spend on other projects, and it works more on your operating expenses as opposed to your capital expenditures. And so our customers really love that because they're able to now concentrate their capital to start another warehouse or to add more advertising, right? To do what they do best, and that's their company, right? They're not, they don't want to be in the robotic business. And then in terms of some of the risks, right, as we talked about, so some of the, some people alluded to, right? Some of the customers are afraid. They're like, is this going to work for me? Is this, is this the right technology? And it really also ties this down, right? Because it makes the company like ours, or people who provide this robotic as a service, owners of that productivity. So the risk level for the customer has been reduced tremendously because if the robotic system is not performing, they're not paying. And we have to make sure that it's performing. So whether it's an arm or whether it's a robotic, platform that moves around. So I'm really excited actually by that business model because I think we're seeing, more and more customers willing to adopt technology, willing to move forward. It becomes almost a no-brainer for them because they're like, look, you tell me that I'm going to save this much money. I don't have to put a lot of capital down. And in fact, day one, I'm going to start saving money. And that makes it almost a no-brainer introducing it. On top of the fact that, the robot system can introduce fairly easily. We've done deployments that have gone over a weekend, right? And moved those over. I'm sure the other teams have the same kind of capabilities, right? Of bringing it in very quickly. So the risk levels have been mitigated tremendously. The capital that the company has to spend has been mitigated tremendously. And even what's happening today with COVID, 2020, we noticed that, very difficult for bigger companies to spend a lot of money. They want to hoard on to their cash. They don't know what's going to happen. And they know they need a solution and they got to move that forward. So I think this kind of business model, with different iterations, we've seen other companies do different iterations of it and stuff like that. I think it's just going to expand more because again, I think if you look at the software as a service, that's sort of what happened, right? Slowly and slowly, the software systems became partners with the businesses. They provided them the solution, they maintain everything, and the business can concentrate on what it does best. We're doing the same thing with the hardware, and I'm really excited about that.
Right. So when we talk about risk, so let's talk about robotic safety. So Fergal, we're running out of time here, but I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk just a little bit about about the safety systems associated with some of these robotic solutions. And I think you're on mute. It's the key phrase of 2020. You're on mute.
I was on mute. Thank you, Matt. So for all of us here on this panel, safety is the #1 priority. Wes mentioned earlier on ISO standards, and we all design right to those standards. A few of us on this panel are on different industry committees where we work on safety standards. Depending then on the type of robot you have, there are different ways you need to think about safety. So for us, we've got a collaborative robot, which is working next to people all day. Like we have to be safe, but we also need to feel safe around people. And so being safe, it's easy. There has been such advances with LiDARs, with RGBD cameras and software that every one of us, we can pick up when a box drops or a foot steps in front of the drive, and we're able to move around it, or we're able to stop really quickly. What I think is a very interesting problem to solve is that problem of feeling safe. And so I'll give you a quick little story. Imagine, okay, you've got a warehouse with narrow aisles. So with narrow aisles, you've decided, right, I'm going to have a one-way system. You've got pickers who are out in the aisles. You have a picker who ignores the one-way system, and so that picker, that associate, is going the wrong way down a one-way aisle. Now you have a collaborative robot who's following the rules, going the correct way down that one-way aisle. And so the associate and the collaborative robot are getting closer and closer to each other. So being safe is, yes, the robot stops and keeps its distance from the associate. So the associate then sees that the robot stops. The associate might realize, oh, I'm going the wrong way in a one-way aisle. I'm going to take a step back. The associate takes a step back. Now, we need to think about, what should the robot do next? Should the robot nudge forward? And we think if the robot starts nudging forward and goes right up into the associate's face, that doesn't really feel safe. That's not a nice experience. I don't want to be around something that's kind of almost pushing me backwards in a narrow aisle. So that's one of the fun things that we really need to think about around, like, the balance with being safe and also feeling safe, and making these systems, these solutions, something that people actually enjoy and want to work with.
Yeah, thanks, Virgil. I mean, excellent points here. And, robotic safety is definitely, at the forefront of all of our minds here, and very, very critical. So, so we are out of time. But I do want to thank everyone for their participation today. And it was, great conversation and excellent points by all the panelists. And so my sincere thank you for joining us and joining me in the topic that we love to talk about. So thank you very much. So I'll kick this back up to Bob.
Thanks, Matt. And Matt, if you can still hear me, I'm going to put you on the spot for a moment, and I'm going to apologize ahead of time. This was a great conversation, by the way. We had a number of questions from panelists, and rather than ask for an email address from everybody, Matt, is it okay to use your email address and panelists could send you questions? I'm sorry, attendees could send you questions, and then if you can't answer it, you know who on the panel might be good for it. Would that be okay?
Absolutely, yeah. I'll make sure that it gets directed to the right individuals here, and we'll make sure that all those questions get answered.
Okay, and can you shout out your email address? I don't have it in front of me.
Matt.wicks@honeywell.com.
Right, and Wicks is W-I-C-K-S at honeywell.com. Great, thanks. I really enjoyed that. What I particularly enjoyed is that y'all highlighted, honestly and openly, the barriers and the challenges that customers have faced that you're dealing with, and also the importance of software. And one of the reasons I want to bring that up is our next presenter is Adrian Kumar, who's the Global Head of Operations, Science and Analytics at DHL Supply Chain. When it comes to the use of autonomous mobile robots in warehousing and distribution, Adrian is about as close to a hardened veteran as you're going to find. My guess is he's worked with every one of those panelists, because I know he's tried out about every, AMR technology out there. They've been working with autonomous mobile robots for at least the past 3 or 4 years. And a key message Adrian is going to get across is, while they still use a variety of AMRs, to them, depending on their customer solution, it's really become all about the software, not about the hardware. And he'll even talk about this transformation from when they first started out. They were focused on, the little nuances from one hardware to another, and what they realized was the real productivity came from how they utilize software. So with that, we're going to start with Adrian. This is a pre-recorded segment, so we won't be able to take any questions. And again, thanks to the panelists.
Okay, hello everyone. My name is Adrian Kumar, and today I'm going to be talking about enabling rapid fulfillment through robotics and advanced analytics. Okay, so as far as agenda, I'm going to give a very brief overview about our company, DHL, talk about our digitization initiative, and then get into different robotic options that we're testing and deploying here at DHL, including AGVs, robotic picking, and then talk about some of our analytical approaches that we've really started to look at to improve efficiency, and wrap up with conclusions. So DHL, I think most of you guys might be somewhat familiar with our company. We are Europe's largest postal service. We really have four main divisions. We're the post office for Germany. We're the #1 international express company. We're also a freight forwarder, and the division that I work for, contract logistics, we're the largest contract logistics provider in the world and here in North America as well. At DHL, we've been embarking on a journey for digital transformation for a number of years now. And our teams, they research different trends in the marketplace, and they publish a trend radar, and our latest trend radar just came out, and it's available, and you can download a whole bunch of white papers. And what our team does is really look at and identify trends and identify what kind of impact those trends will have on supply chains out there. And they split these trends between social and business trends and technology trends. And the distance from the center is really our view on how much impact these different trends will make, and then how far away they are is also when we think they'll be relevant. And you can see a number of different trends, including artificial intelligence there, have made the latest trend radar, and I encourage you guys to go out and download these different white papers because they are very well done. So what we've also been doing here is, after identifying those different trends, is going out and prioritizing pilots in those different areas that we've identified. So it starts with that research and the proof of concept, but then when we identify different products and different solutions that are out there in the marketplace, we want to quickly move to productization. So maybe 5 years ago, we were testing our first AMR, autonomous mobile robot deployments. And then, more recently, we started to productize that and roll that out across many operations across Europe and the United States and APAC as well. So this is something that we take very seriously, where we're going to test a lot of different concepts. The ones that we feel have good payback and are scalable, we're going to productize them and then commercial and industrialize them and roll them out across our various sites around the world. A lot of the initial focus here was on more technology, hardware type solutions. And a lot of these solutions are driven by software. So when we first started this program, there was a lot of robotic type solutions, drones, AGVs, etc. But what we're seeing now is that along and complementing some of those technologies, we've also started to enhance our algorithmic type solutions, our smart software type solutions, our WMS enhancements, because we feel that those types of solutions as well can be very economical and can drive a whole bunch of efficiencies. So let me first start talking about our robotic approaches. So our different robotic solutions kind of fall into two main categories. We have robotic type solutions or AGV type solutions for our more industrial sites where we're moving pallets and lifting heavy loads like our consumer goods warehouses. And then we have more mobile robotic solutions for our piece picking operations. And there are a lot of different options for our industrial type sites. If we're working in an operation that maybe has a plant attached to a warehouse, we might utilize some of this technology here for horizontal movements. Those could include tuggers or deck load AGVs, pallet trucks that can help transport products from a plant to a warehouse or across a large warehouse from the storage area of a warehouse to the co-packing area, etc. And then we're also getting into AGVs that can do vertical type movements, stackers and reach trucks, AGVs that can do precision put away type moves and move stuff from the dock to a storage area, to a high bay storage area. These are some of the technologies that we've also been looking at. Recent case study here has seen us kind of really test out automatic trailer unloading. And what we like about some of the technologies we've been testing in this space is that we can basically deploy this technology without modifying the warehouse environment. That is, we can deploy these types of trucks. They don't need to be integrated with a warehouse management system. A supervisor will oversee perhaps 4 to 5 automatic unloaders at a time. And these unloaders can go into a truck and through all of the artificial intelligence that they have, kind of identify pallets, identify how to line up their forks, and pick up those pallets from the truck and then move them and stack them on the dock. So this is very, very effective technology where you can have 4 to 5 unloaders, where you can have a human overseeing 4 to 5 unloaders, unloading 4 to 5 trucks at a single time, and working at the same pace that a human being could do, but in an automated fashion. Also, we've been testing robotic deployments, of course, for our piece picking operations. This is really where we got started, working with a lot of those AMR type companies like Locust and 6 Rivers. And really here the challenge is in an e-fulfillment operation, you have very low density picks. So your pickers, if you're not manipulating the work that you send to the floor, the pickers, you'll find that they're going to be walking miles and miles every day and walking a long time in between picks. And that's very inefficient. And what we do at DHL is, because there are a lot of different AMR, autonomous mobile robotic solutions on the market, is we study our customer's profile and determine what is the best solution for our customers' different profiles. And that's why we've deployed so many different types of these AMR solutions. Let me just show you here a quick video. So, here's the manual way to do it. You have a picker engaged with a pick cart, picking product and basically walking the entire warehouse floor. Then you can have basically a follow me robot, a robot that just simply follows the operator around the warehouse floor so they don't have to engage with the cart, and they also don't have to go back and forth to the pack stations. Then you could have a lead me robot. Lead me robot here will lead the picker through the warehouse floor, will give them all of the visual cues, where to stop, how much to pick. So you start to see bigger productivity gains. Another approach is the swarming robotic approach, where you're going to have multiple robots for a particular operator, higher ratio of robots per person, and these robots move between zones, and the operator doesn't necessarily follow any one given robot. And that's a solution that we've deployed quite a bit. You have pick and pass robots, robots that kind of mimic the picking and passing of a conveyor system, moving the product to different zones where the operators can then pick the products and put them onto the tote that the robot will take away. And then finally we have goods to person solutions with robots, where the robots will retrieve the specific items that are required on an order and bring them to a put wall or a consolidation station where the orders can be matched up. So, there are a lot of different options on the market. And, you might be asking, okay, what makes sense, where and when? Well, there's a trade-off. There's a trade-off between capital cost and efficiency generally, where, as you kind of go down the spectrum of different options that we talk about, you might require more investment. You're going to require potentially more robots, more capital or lease commitments with these different approaches. But then you're going to see that offset in labor. It doesn't always line up like this, but in theory, this is kind of, the science behind it. Kind of the more capital you put into a solution, the more labor you're going to drive out. And the trick is to kind of find that right balance based off of our customers' volumes, profiles, et cetera. And then also you have other issues such as product compatibility. But I think that's what we at DHL really pride ourselves on, is finding the right solution for our particular customers. So now I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about analytical type approaches. because we've started deploying solutions here at DHL that rely almost kind of entirely on an analytical type solution that doesn't necessarily come with any new hardware commitments. And we find that that this could be very flexible and this could be very scalable in our operations. So a core WMS does a lot of things well. A core WMS has a lot of good reporting and analytics, obviously manages the inventory well, knows where the inventory is at all times, knows the locations and the quantities of each item and their particular bin locations, and can create work and execute work, send that out to the floor, can create tasks and plan detailed work activities by task, by area, and really generate all the different tasks associated with moving stuff from receiving to storage to picking to loading. That's what a WMS has historically done very well. But in a lot of more complex operations, you need a lot more than just core WMS functionality to run your warehouse efficiently. And we've seen these different areas kind of being supplemented, these different areas of a warehouse management system being supplemented, whether it's labor management to kind of track the employees and monitor their productivity, transportation management to kind of manage the outbound, slotting software to manage where SKUs should be slotted and when to move SKUs between different bin sizes based on optimal replenishment strategies, and then tasking and execution, how to get the work out to the floor. And there's, of course, different ways that you can enhance the tasking and execution of a warehouse management system. The WMS vendors might offer add-ons themselves, or there might be warehouse control systems that are coupled with automation, control systems that maybe have automation. The automation has a control system, and the control system will have some sort of enhanced logic that kind of presents the work more efficiently to the operators on the floor. There's warehouse execution systems that basically take the tasks from the WMS, optimize them, and send them out to the floor themselves, or something that we're kind of looking at DHL, which we call microservices. So kind of taking inputs from the WMS, performing optimizations, feeding that output back into the WMS, and having the WMS kind of execute based off of our recommendations. So how do we go about developing these microservices? We have a team of data scientists that kind of specialize in optimization, and they're kind of building out and testing these microservices, utilizing languages like Python and operational research models that are available through the Python libraries, and then kind of building out these different models and doing proofs of concepts with them. And when we do find that we have something that we think can be rolled out and can benefit our operations and is very scalable, then we'll make an investment in industrializing this microservice and kind of building an enterprise version of it that all of our systems can potentially integrate into. So, today, with open system architecture that a lot of warehouse management systems have, we're able to cut into the WMS without necessarily cutting into the core WMS logic or cutting into the code. Ideally, we don't want to cut into the code. We don't want to write big modifications or anything like that, but we want to pass information through APIs, through an integration layer to a microservice that can perform an optimization and then pass it back to the warehouse management system. And there's a lot of benefits with doing things this way. We leverage the existing systems for what they do well. We move away from some of the rigid wave-based work plans that those systems might have with them. And we're able to kind of optimize several warehouse processes, be it for optimizing the wave itself, the pick path, how we cluster orders together, how we prioritize orders together. This is what we're able to do by kind of performing this optimization outside of the WMS system. So I'll walk through a couple examples. Here is an example for wave optimization. And when you're running an e-fulfillment operation, you typically see two main types of orders: single item orders and multi-item orders. And the larger you let the wave build up, the more efficient your single item order picks are, because you don't need to consolidate those orders. Those orders just have one single item on them. So building up single item orders makes a lot of sense. Running a large pool of singles makes sense. Multis doesn't make quite as much sense to build up as much, but there's still efficiencies to be gained. So this is where we take outputs from the WMS, we run them through kind of our machine learning model, and based off of the resources that are on the floor today, the characteristics of that work, we're going to make a recommendation on how much to wave, when, and where. And we've also seen the robotic companies have this type of solution as well, because in their hardware, they make these types of dynamic decisions on how to release that work as well. So as a simple example, a lot of operations are going to be tempted to just wave the work when it comes in. So every hour work comes in and you immediately send it to the floor. Send it to the floor, keep everyone utilized, keep everyone busy. This could make a lot of sense, or would seem to make a lot of sense. However, you have, the singles, as I mentioned before, really benefit from building up the work. So here we can see an example where we're not just releasing the work as it comes in, we're holding the singles based off of our recommendation and then releasing it here on the third hour, releasing 3 hours worth of work. And now releasing multis on the fourth hour, and on the sixth hour, releasing a large chunk of work based off of real-time events. What's happening on the floor? Are pickers utilized? Could they use some more work? When are there shift changes? Things like that. Running those types of optimizations to figure out what makes the most sense, when and where. And what we found is that when we do this, and when we kind of hold the work and strategically decide when to release it, we're going to generate more efficient work to the floor. And in this particular example here, realized an 18% pick productivity improvement. Another microservice that we looked at is how we cluster orders together. Typical warehouse management system could have a first come, first serve rule, or a first seed location rule to cluster orders together. So inevitably, if you have to pick multiple orders and you just kind of put them together based off of simple logic, you might inevitably put together orders onto a cart, like in this example, that have to travel the entire warehouse pick path. So we've developed a more advanced seeding algorithm. And this seeding algorithm looks at where is the busiest aisles and how can I identify orders in that aisle using more advanced analytics that are contained within that aisle or one or two adjacent aisles. So using the same example and this type of seeding algorithm, we're looking for orders that are contained within the first two aisles and have selected a different bunch of orders here and completely minimize travel. And this is something that we've started to run out. We had a press release on this and are seeing great productivity gains by adding this enhanced cluster logic to our WMS systems. Here's just a simple example here, a simulation where we mimicked our logic versus the core WMS logic for an omni-channel operation. And you can see here in dark orange, the locations that the WMS would visit, and in dark blue, the locations that we would visit for the different carts that we create throughout the wave. And you can see the cumulative aisles that we're saving as we run our algorithm and produce the assignments ourselves. The good news is we're running off of the back of the WMS. The WMS is doing everything that it does well. It's allocating the inventory. It's cartonizing the work. It is basically building the pick cart after we give it instructions, and it's communicating the work to the floor. We're not ripping and replacing anything. We're just enhancing some core optimization logic at a very specific point in time and seeing great productivity gains as you're seeing here in this simulation. Another area is task prioritization. So if you have a list of tasks here, and here's just an example, we have a list of 4 tasks, 3 putaways and 1 full pallet pick. Well, if you're just following kind of the sequential task rules, we'd kind of look at basically performing the first putaway task. And then, if we're able to perform an optimization at this point, we're looking at the proximity of tasks deeper down in the queue and identifying the fact that there is a full pallet pick further down in the queue that potentially could be reprioritized and could be bumped up so that we could, as long as this person has permission to perform a full pallet pick, which in this case they do, we will now reprioritize that task, move it up in the queue, and then perform that full pallet pick. Perform that full pallet pick, bring it back to the dock, and then perform the other 2 tasks in their remaining order and save time. So that's what this essentially does by reprioritizing tasks based off of more kind of information. Where is the picker? What are the priorities? What is that operator's permission to perform a new task, and do that reprioritization. So, in conclusion, there's significant disruption taking place in supply chain. It's driven by a lot of profile changes, tight labor market. We're seeing the technologies greatly evolve. We at DHL have been embracing and promoting a culture at innovation for some time now. We're really big on robotics, but we're also looking at more analytical type solutions as well. So with that, I want to thank you guys for listening in on our presentation. Thank you.
Adrian, thank you. That was a really great presentation. I heard you talk about robots at another conference, 3 or 4 years ago, and watching DHL's journey through both the robotics side and what you hit on today, the software side, I think is pretty interesting. Just an observation, you touched on early about how your focus at one point was on hardware, and it's increasingly becoming the software and the algorithms. And what struck me listening to you talking about task execution is that applies to your robotics, it applies to your AGVs, and it applied to a lift truck driver making decisions about what to put away, what to pick, and so on. And it really is shifting the focus. One of our other panels is the software panel, shifting the focus from the hardware to the software. So I found that pretty interesting. Let me ask you one robotics question, which is, you had the animated slide that showed all those different approaches to robotics. And I know at one time, DHL was piloting all those things from the follow me to the swarm and that. Today, now that you've got 3 or 4 years experience under your belt, or possibly even more, are you still utilizing all those different capabilities or approaches depending on your customer?
Yeah, we are, and I think there's kind of been 3 main solutions that have worked their way into our operations, and that's kind of the follow me, the swarming approach, and then the kind of goods to person type approach. And I think we've been rolling out all three at a pretty good clip, because some of them might have a larger payload. Some of them might be more relevant when when you have higher labor costs, you need to drive out more labor, or you have more SKUs. So we are seeing kind of those three in particular being rolled out quite a bit.
Well, and watching that from your very first presentation to that one, the goods to person was new. That was not, originally one of the things that you were talking about. It was up through the Swarm Me. And so seeing those two examples that you had up there of goods to person were pretty interesting. One of the things I wondered, wasn't part of the presentation, just curiosity. Are you now looking at piece picking robots, or are you still focused on the AMRs?
Yeah, we have piloted piece picking robots, and interestingly enough, there was an announcement yesterday about Ocado purchasing Kindred, and Kindred specializes in those piece picking robots,
right.
And so Ocado obviously is maybe there's a synergy there with their solution and Kindred, but yeah, we have looked at that definitely. And where there's a fit, we will look at that, look at those paybacks. Our product profile is very diverse, and we just can't tell a customer, well, only give us stuff which is 100% compatible with
right.
a particular robot or solution. We got to take it all. So sometimes that does limit our ability to roll out those types of piece picking solutions. And the human being is obviously maybe the greatest piece picker of all, that they're able to kind of manage all that dexterity and different type of item profile. So we'll keep an eye on it. We'll look at it. But I think that the collaborative robots is where we've had the most success thus far.
One of the things I was interested in when you were talking about the task execution, and which I think might be another way to think of warehouse execution. And we've seen sort of two developments. One is the warehouse execution that started coming out of the automation people. And now WMS is sort of talking about that. And then, it still has the WES, but what the voice people and the data collection people, the Vocalex and whatever, are talking about is work execution. You're developing your own. One of the things I wondered about that is, one, it sounds like the intelligence in your case lives with you and goes back to the WMS versus the robotics people are doing some of this as well. If you're in a situation where it's yours and the robotics people are doing it as well, who controls the game? Is it yours since you're developing your own?
Yeah, so in those scenarios, it would be ours. Okay. I mean, we have hundreds of sites across the world. We are over 400 in North America, thousands right. across the world. So there are so many different options that we're looking at that, in certain sites, yes, we're going to deploy a robotic type solution, and they're going to have their own software and their own controls and their own optimization. Maybe we're supplementing that a little bit with ours, or maybe we're running a lot of their logic, and that's clearly theirs, and that's part of the solution that they bring. And then we could have another operation where we looked at those different technologies. We find the best payback is maybe with our own systematic enhancements, and that's going to be something that's proprietary to DHL in that particular instance. So, it's a pretty big space here, right. And because we're rolling out these different solutions across our operations, there's different combinations of kind of intellectual property and who's kind of bringing the solution and who's implementing it that we're kind of finding across our sites.
Great. Well, thank you, Adrian. That's all the time we have. I hope the attendees enjoyed it as much as I did. Really great presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. And that's the end of this block. We're now going to take a 15-minute break. Brian?
We'd like to remind all our attendees about the leaderboard game. The leaderboard game gives everyone the opportunity to win thousands of dollars in prizes simply for participating in the conference. And again, we'd like to thank our sponsors of the NextGen Supply Chain Conference, especially our Diamond Level sponsor, Honeywell Intelligrated, our Platinum sponsor, the Association for Supply Chain Management, and our Gold sponsor, Alemica. Now we'd like to ask the attendees to take a walk through the exhibit hall before the next session. All of the exhibitors have a representative ready should you have any questions. Our next session will begin at 12:30 Central Time. We'll see you then.
They say love is more precious than gold.